Hey mathematicians, thanks for tuning in and joining us. Today we're going to be learning about integer rules, and to do that we are going to be making soup. No, not the soup like your grandmother makes, but magical integer soup. Our soup is special in that we have to make sure the temperature is just right, and the temperature of our soup always starts at 0 degrees. As we move through, imagine our temperature as on a number line. We control the temperature by adding or removing magical integer cubes that never melt. There are red cubes that represent hot cubes. These are positive numbers, and each block raises the temperature of the soup 1 degree. But there are also cold cubes, which we'll use the blue cubes for. These represent negative numbers and lower the temperature of our soup by 1 degree. Is everyone ready to get started cooking? Great, let's get to it. First, we're going to look at what happens when we add cubes to our soup. Adding obviously means adding. If I added 3 hot cubes to my soup, would my temperature increase or decrease? In this example, you can see that I'm adding 3 hot cubes. Yes, the temperature would increase. My temperature would increase by 3 degrees. So now my soup would be positive 3 degrees. What would happen if I added cold cubes to my pot? I started at 0 and add 3 cold cubes. My soup would get colder, meaning the temperature would decrease. My temperature would now be negative 3. So everyone's in agreement. If we add hot cubes, my temperature goes up, and if we add cold cubes, the temperature goes down. What do you suppose would happen if I added 1 hot and 1 cold cube? 1 blue, 1 red, what's going to happen? My temperature wouldn't change at all. Adding a degree and going down a degree would just take me to 0, so I wouldn't change my temperature at all. Does anyone know what these opposite numbers are called? Zero pair, that is correct. All right, here's my next scenario. I want to add 5 hot and 2 cold cubes to my soup. So here's what that looks like as an equation. 5 hot are positive numbers and 2 cold are negative numbers. So what is the temperature if I increase 5 degrees but then add negative 2 for the cold cubes? Use a number line to help you if you need. My temperature will be positive 3 degrees. I have added more hot cubes than cold cubes, so my soup is still hot. 1 blue pairs with 1 red to cancel out, leaving me with 3 red cubes. Positive 3. What if I add more cold cubes than hot cubes? What if I added 4 cold and 2 hot? Do you see that my soup would be cold? Here's the equation. Negative 4 for the cold cubes plus positive 2 for the red cubes. 2 red and 2 blue cancel out, but then I still have 2 blue cubes, meaning my temperature is now negative 2 degrees. Your turn to try it now. What will the temperature be if we add 3 cold and 6 hot cubes? Take a few seconds and think through this problem. Here's you a hint with the equation. Positive 3. How did you do? Did you do okay? Way to work hard. You're on the right track. Just try and think in terms of the soup getting hotter or colder. What is there more of when you're adding? Now let's look at how we can control our soup by removing cubes. When I say removing, I want you to think subtraction. We're subtracting cubes out of the soup. So now here's the scenario. When hot cubes are removed, if I take out something that's hot, what's going to happen to my soup? In this scenario, I've removed 3 cubes. I started at 0 minus positive 3, means my temperature decreases. If I started at 0 and removed 3, my temperature is now -3. Taking out something hot decreases the temperature. I bet you can predict what's going to happen here. What if I take out cold cubes? If I take out something cold, I started at 0 and I'm going to subtract -3. Taking out cold cubes, what's going to happen? Exactly. The temperature increases. So taking out negative cubes, subtracting a negative number leaves me with +3. My temperature is going to go up. So let's look at what happens if we add and remove cubes in the same setting. So in this scenario here, I'm adding 5 hot cubes, but I remove 1 hot as well. What do you think is going to happen? So I've added 5 hot, so +5, and then I'm removing 1, so -1. So the equation is 5 minus 1. The answer is 4. I know, this is way too easy for you mathematicians. Let's try something harder. Are you ready? Now what will the temperature be if I add 5 hot cubes but remove 1 cold cube? So think about it in terms of temperature. I'm adding 5 hot and taking out 1 cold. See what I did there? Getting tricky. Here's what the equation would look like. I'm adding 5, so +5, but I'm removing, meaning I'm subtracting 1 cold cube, so -1. 5 minus -1. But what's going to happen to the temperature of my soup? Is it going to increase? Is it going to decrease? Remember what we talked about when we remove cold cubes. My temperature is actually going to increase by 1 degree, meaning my temperature is now 6 degrees. Hot raises the temperature, and removing cold also raises it. So subtracting a cold cube is really the same as adding. Next one. We're almost done, I promise. What will the temperature be if we add 3 hot cubes and remove 4 cold cubes? Adding 3 hot, removing 4 cold. Here's the equation. 3 minus -4. Think about overall temperature. Don't get caught up in the numbers. Think about what it's going to do. Adding hot, removing cold. The total temperature is going to increase 7 degrees. Adding 3 hot and subtracting 4 cold is the same as adding 4. Last example. What will the temperature be if we add 4 cold cubes and remove 2 hot cubes? Adding cold, removing hot. What's going to happen to the temperature? -4 for the cold cubes going in, minus +2 for the hot cubes coming out. So it makes the soup more cold. My soup is now -6 degrees. I add cold, lowering the temperature, and took out hot, making the temperature even lower. So here's your turn to show me what you know. If the temperature in my pot is 7 degrees, how can I get the temperature to 5 degrees? How do you suppose I should do that? Take a second and share with your partner. One way you could have done it is just to remove 2 hot cubes. If I'm starting at +7 and take out 2 hot cubes, 7 minus 2, that gets me to 5 degrees. This is the math you've been doing since first grade. But there's also another way. Did any of you come up with another way? We could have also added 2 cold cubes. Starting at 7, adding 2 cold cubes also gets me to 5 degrees. Raise your hand if you came up with this method. Great thinking. So now that you're on to my secret that there's 2 different ways you can change the temperature, try this one. This is the last one. The temperature of my pot is 3 degrees. How can I get the temperature to 7 degrees? Remember, 2 ways. Write them down. Did you get them both? 3 plus 4, adding 4 hot cubes gets me to 7, but I can also remove 4 cold cubes, which also gets me to 7. 3 minus -4 equals 7. Hopefully you can see from this trick here, this is why your teacher says minus a negative is the same thing as adding. You're taking out something negative, which raises the temperature. Thanks for joining us today on Cooking with Integers. Hopefully you've learned something and you're one step closer to becoming a mathematician. Remember guys, keep calculating. You don't have to be a mathematician to think mathematically.